Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Please welcome to the stage the Kerton Group's principal analyst, Derek Kerton.
Hi. Good morning, everybody. I'm Derek Kerton with the Kerton Group. My firm also manages an organization called the Telecom Council of Silicon Valley out in California. We really try to watch innovation that's happening in technology and mesh it with the telecommunications industry. So we have a variety of constituents, members, like the telecom companies some of you represent, France Telecom, NTT Docomo, Deutsche Telekom, etc. And we have a bunch of people who are also the innovators around Silicon Valley, whether they're startups or established vendors like Intel. And we help the two groups understand each other and make their deals and make partnerships a little bit more quickly. This morning, I'll be emceeing you through a few sessions, and I think we're going to get a brief history of time, basically. We're going to start looking back at some of the changes that telecommunications have been able to deliver to the world and improve it, and then we're going to discuss a little bit policies that can affect the impact of telecommunications today and going forwards, and then ultimately we'll talk about investments in telecommunications and where they're being directed and what the impact of those will be over the next decade or so. So with that, I'd like to start with our first speaker, Tim Stronge, who has a fairly long background as an economist and an analyst in telecommunications. He's been with TeleGeography for about 17 years since he got his master's in international economics. So he's got a lot of experience researching and looking at the impact that your companies are able to deliver to developing world and established world, and the changes that, in fact, everybody who's a member of the PTC has been part of driving. So with that, I'd like to invite up our first speaker, Tim Stronge.
Good morning. My name is Tim Stronge, and I'd like to present some information about the telecommunications landscape, the telegeographic landscape across the world, if you will. I thought it would be a kind of a fun challenge to try to take the PTC'13 themes of capacity, capability, and collaboration and try to apply some measurements to those and to see how far we've come. Now, for collaboration, we're all in a free market. We don't do things generally for the fun of it, so I would say that that's more investment. Capacity, that's kind of easy to measure. We have some standard measurements in the industry. We can talk about how many minutes go between countries, or how many cell phone subscribers have, or what the fiber optic capacity is that connects various countries in the world. But what about capability? How do you measure that? Well, what does that even mean? That's kind of a fuzzy concept. I suspect that a lot of the conversation here at PTC this year has focused on carrier capability. What can service providers do? I'd kind of like to talk more generally about end users, how telecommunications has changed the capability of just regular people. And to measure that, I would propose that we look at prices. Capability really isn't so much whether a person has a cell phone, but can they afford to use that cell phone? How much does it cost to call abroad for an average family? How much is a normal business, how much do they have to pay to connect their various offices? And finally, when doing this exercise, I soon realized that doing a normal 5 or 7 year trend really wasn't going to work. It's to get a better perspective, you have to take a much longer view, and it's frankly a lot more fun. So I'd like to take a look more about a 100-year view of where industries come and where we may be going. So if you're willing to take a journey with me through the mists of time, let's move. I'd like to start in the year 1927. That was the year that voice communications across the Atlantic was possible. Before then, if you needed to reach someone, if you were in the United States and you needed to reach someone in the United Kingdom, you had to telegraph. It was pure text. Beginning in 1927, voice communications via shortwave radio transmissions were introduced. But it wasn't too cheap. The cost of a voice call across the Atlantic was $75 for a 3-minute call. In today's terms, that's about $1,000. So that was, you could make a voice call, but it was the preserve of the very rich, governments, businesses, and the great Gatsbys of the world. Those are the people who'd be making these voice calls. Well, things progressed in the coming few decades. Beginning in the 1950s, it was possible to use a cable across the Atlantic for voice. And in 1964, Bell Telephone Systems, aka AT&T, put out this advertisement, trying to encourage people, end users, to pick up their telephone and make that phone call, because it's possible. Bell was bragging about how much cheaper it was to call in 1964 to 1927. I'm not sure if you can read the fine point, but it was making that point. It's so much cheaper now. In fact, it was only $2.50 per hour. Think of how advanced we are in 1964 compared to those poor rubes in 1920s. Well, if adjusted for inflation, the cost of a $2.50 per minute call would be about $90. So again, for normal people, that's simply not going to happen. We had the capacity to make these calls. We had the ability, but not really the capability for end users. So if you're thinking in your head like I did when I saw those statistics, I figured, well, if I really need to reach someone, I'll just go back to the old technology of telegrams. Text is a lot more efficient, a lot cheaper. This is not a real telegram. It's something I just made up for this presentation. But it reads, if you don't mind, I'll read it to you. This is the average length of an international telegram in 1980. 47.5 words per message. Back then, a telegram cost on average 20 cents per word. This baby would have cost over $24 adjusted for inflation. All in all, I would rather text or email, lol. 47 words plus lol, which is really only half a word. So that's 47.5 words a minute per message. In other words, you're paying about $24 for 2 tweets. That's pretty steep. So the capability still wasn't really there for intense international communications. Now, if you don't mind getting sidetracked for a moment, this next slide is an aside. It doesn't really promote my points at all. I just thought it was too cool not to share. It's an image of what might have been the costliest telegram ever in the history of humanity. I don't know if any of you are history buffs and can guess what this is, but a few hints. One, if the timestamp, the date stamp from the upper right is 1917. The destination is over on the upper left. That's to the German legation in Mexico City. This is the famous Zimmerman telegram sent by the Foreign Secretary of the German Empire, Zimmerman, to his ambassador to Mexico. And it was instructing him that all the numbers are encoded. It was instructing him that to tell the Mexican government that Germany was anticipating having to go to war against the United States quite soon, and it was inviting Mexico to join in the cause. Anyone here from the states of Texas? Any Texans? New Mexico, Arizona? Okay, we got a few people. You may be interested to know that one of the things that was offered in this telegram was back to Mexico recovery of the territories of Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. I don't know if any of you have accidentally hit forward on an email when you meant to hit reply and it went to the wrong person. Well, this was intercepted by British intelligence, handed to the American government, which in turn leaked it to the American people. It made it far easier to justify a declaration of war against Germany. So in essence, you may think a $24 per message telegram is quite expensive, but this telegram may well have served to put the final nail in the coffin of the German Empire. So back to voice. Remember the slide from a moment ago from 1964 from AT&T encouraging people to make phone calls. Well, that campaign continued. This is from the 1970s. Many of you probably remember, many Americans here remember the Reach Out and Touch Someone campaign. This is sort of in that same theme. This was this is a still from a local television ad. And if any of you are American college football fans, you may recognize the celebrity endorser that AT&T had. That's the legendary coach Paul Bear Bryant of the University of Alabama football team. And in this 30-second TV ad, which ran in Alabama, and I'm showing this because it's personal to me. I remember this. I was a boy in the 1970s in Alabama. I certainly remember this ad. He basically was extolling the importance of making use of our communications devices. He explained at the beginning of the ad that the very first thing he does when his players come in from high school is he makes them, as freshmen in college, he makes them sit down and write a postcard to their mothers and fathers at home. And at the end of the 30-second ad, Bear Bryant turns to the audience and he says, and by the way, his mother had passed away some years earlier, he challenges the audience. He says, "Have you called your mama? I sure wish I could call mine." Well, I guarantee you, if you go to Alabama and ask men especially of the age of 40 and above, if they remember this ad, many of them will. It really touches on many of the cornerstones of what it means to be a Southern man, all the things you love. Country, it's almost a patriotic duty to call. You touch on country, God, college football, and mama. So yes, the ad is a little quaint in modern terms, but it's also a little odd if you think about it. When is the last time you've seen an advertisement from your broadband ISP asking you to download more stuff? Or your mobile operator to, hey, make more calls on our network? It's sort of funny to look back on this because in today's age, so many times you hear carriers complaining about people using their services. They're clogging up our network. Oh, that Google, they're piggybacking on us too much and encouraging people to use our network too much. Well, things were a little different. There are a couple of major differences in the way things are structured today than back then. One, today, there are competitive carriers, and so you try to compete for subscribers. Back then, there was a monopoly. And secondly, the monopolies could try to exercise monopoly and encourage the maximization of their network because voice calls were charged still per minute, and like they are often still today, but very expensive, as we've seen. So even though we're able to make calls, our capabilities still really weren't there to call intensively. It was still very expensive. Well, soon after this, things really began to change. Voice service prices really fell for three major reasons. One, probably most important reason, not just in the United States, but all over the world, is deregulation. Secondly, there were cost declines that happened due to technological change. And third, perhaps least important, but this is what I want to focus on for the rest of this presentation, capacity changed. This is a table that shows the capacity of submarine cables across the Atlantic in today's terms, in outmoded terms of voice circuits, or 64 kilobit per second circuit equivalents. This is how we planned cables up until through the 80s and into the mid-90s, and now we think of things in terms of gigabits or terabits per second, but these are in voice circuit equivalents. The very first across the Atlantic, 1956, TAT1, 48 simultaneous voice circuits. Not too bad. That's 4 dozen conversations. It's pretty good. It's better than using that shortwave radio. TAT8, the first fiber optic cable across the Atlantic, about 7,500 voice circuit equivalents. Now, AC1, that's the first, or one of the first private fiber optic systems, not the first across the Atlantic, but it's arguably the one that started the bandwidth boom craze, almost 500,000 circuits. And today, if you look at how much lit capacity there is on fiber optic cables, all the different cables across the Atlantic, it's roughly the equivalent of 333 million. So capacity has happened. And really, a theme that I'd like to come back to is collaboration and capacity and capability. Collaboration or investment. That happened when people identified problems with capability. Things were expensive to get across the Atlantic, and they had new technology to connect. Capacity comes from investment. And finally, capability or cheaper prices come from new capacity. That certainly is what's happened on the fiber optic market across the Atlantic. International bandwidth prices have really fallen. If you look all the way over on the left, you can see what the price for an IRU for an STM1 circuit, 155 megabit per second circuit, was in 1997, $16 million. So imagine getting that revenue from selling one circuit. So that was the kind of price that allowed Global Crossing, reportedly, to be able to maintain for a brief period of time a fleet of 5 jets and supposedly a Picasso in the office. And in fact, Global Crossing, many of you remember, had an office in Beverly Hills. I think that's rather telling because when this bandwidth boom happened, it's like every other Jed Clampett in Texas wanted to move out west, build them a cable, and get a home with where they could swim in the cement pond. And you see what happened when Jed Clampetts, about a dozen Jed Clampetts, get their funding from banks. They build their cables, prices have plunged. It's plunged so severely that I had to do 2 charts. One is the absolute scale on the left, one is a logarithmic scale on the right. So you see prices have changed. Has there ever been a price drop in the history of mankind that happened so fast and so violently for a major product? There may have been, but I'm not aware of it. Capacity changed and capabilities changed as well. So as fiber optic capacity prices fell, so too did voice prices. That's why it's being tracked in this chart. So the price per minute of international calls from the United States beginning in 1965. And this is unadjusted for inflation, by the way, so if I adjusted it, it would be a far more dramatic decline. Still over $3 per minute in 1965, and it fell quite rapidly for many years, especially in the 80s and then again in the late 1990s. The funny thing that's happened is as prices have fallen, demand or traffic has greatly increased. In 1980, between the United States and China, there were 840,000 minutes per year. Now, last year, there were 6.3 billion minutes. Part of that is political. There's more intense communications and migration between China and the U.S., but really it's enabled because of the prices. In Mexico, calling from the United States to Mexico in 1980, about 179 million minutes of traffic. In last year, 23 billion minutes of traffic. And it's not just volumes have changed, but the way we behave has changed. Back even as late as 1980, voice calling was still the preserve of the rich or the people who really needed to communicate. Multinational corporations were something that were really special, really big. But many of you, I certainly am, are part of a small company that's a multinational corporation. And it's the only way we're able to make this work is because of cheap communications. One of our workers married a Slovak girl, and he now lives in Bratislava and manages people from our DC office from there. I live in the Blue Ridge Mountains area of Maryland, and I work from home 3 days a week. And it's enabled because of cheaper communications at the end user level. So our capabilities have changed. Going back to the idea of identifying opportunities for investment, for new capacity, the AC1 cable really helped usher in a new era in which lots and lots of countries around the world received fiber optic capacity. By 1998, most of developed markets in the world had at least one cable. Countries on this map marked in red were ones that did not have fiber optic capacity. So back then, if you had some money to invest, you wanted to build a cable, it's pretty easy to identify those opportunities. You pointed to a place in red, you said, I'm going to build a cable there, and you can make it happen. This is the map today. These in red are the countries that do not have fiber optic connectivity. Pretty much the whole world has been painted gray. Most of these countries in gray have access to 3 or more cables. Some don't, but many do. So where are these opportunities where countries don't have access to a fiber optic cable? Well, there you go. This is the list, as far as I'm aware. Anyone want to build a cable to North Korea? No? Well, I've got one volunteer. Pretty brave. My understanding is that there are cables that go by Somalia, but unless I'm mistaken, none have yet dropped in Somalia due to security concerns. But if you go down the list, the number of countries with sizable populations are not really there. Most of these countries or islands are very small populations and remote and expensive. Yet even so, some of these countries will get access to a new submarine cable quite soon. Those are marked with asterisks. And there may be more in the works that I'm simply not aware of. So it's not as easy now to identify problems with capacity, problems with do they have connections or not? That's more at the wholesale level. What about what's happening at the end user level? This is a map of wireless penetration. It's a shaded map. Gray in this one is bad, and blue is good. Blue means that there's plenty of mobile or wireless penetration in a country. Look how much blue is on this map. This is from as of the Q4 2012. It's really incredible. And just 15 or even 10 years ago, who would have predicted that Latin America would have as much mobile penetration as North America, or North Africa would have similar mobile penetration to Western Europe? The gains that we've had as a society are pretty incredible. Fixed broadband penetration is a bit of a different story, but even so, there have been impressive gains there. So far, I've kind of painted a rosy picture. We've had a lot of investment. Our capacity all around the world has increased, and our capabilities have changed as just regular humans, as average people. But the gains have not been universal. If you start looking at the capability side of things, that is, the prices, the facade begins to crack a little bit. Cheap bandwidth is not universal. That's one thing that we found, and that remains so today. These are prices for a 10 gigabit per second wavelength circuit, which across the Atlantic and many parts of the world are generally parceled out as annual leases. This is the cost of a monthly charge on an annual lease. And you can see all the way over on the left, the prices that we saw earlier, London to New York capacity. Well, trans-Pacific capacity is also fairly cheap, and it's going down. It has gone down even further beyond what we've seen here. Not so all across the world. Miami, Sao Paulo, still very expensive compared to trans-Pacific. The Europe to Asia prices, those prices are under a lot of pressure, but even so, those are very expensive too. But again, that's more at the carrier level. How does that translate down to us as end users, as families calling or businesses looking to get connected? Well, this is what the businesses must pay to connect their offices through an IP virtual private network. And this is a monthly port price in a city in a country for a T1 or E1 size, so fairly small size. New York, London, Paris, virtually identical. Prices are pretty uniform there. Even Moscow now, they're approaching Western European prices. Sao Paulo, too, not too bad. Move to Beijing, it's getting kind of expensive. Jakarta, certainly expensive. And there are some places of the world where it's prohibitive still to connect via VPN. Our capabilities are not the same all across the world. So to conclude, I think there are a few lessons we've had from our 100-year history. One is that, yes, our capacities have changed. Our capabilities have changed too. The telecom network build-out has yielded amazing progress. Families can call loved ones now, whereas before they wouldn't probably have talked until they could visit abroad. Businesses can move abroad and still communicate with each other. Internet access is increasingly ubiquitous. And how did we do this? It's through investment, and the problem that you often hear is that we're a victim of our own success in the telecom industry. We've built so much, margins are low, and people seem frustrated that we're at a point where we're failing. But I would argue that's not a failure, that's a success. That's how the free market is supposed to do. You're supposed to, investment will draw down profits, and then people will benefit. That's certainly what we've seen. So the challenging of wiring nations to each other is basically over. Virtually every country with a significant population now has a fiber optic connection. The challenge of building in competition on those networks and sufficient diversity for those networks is not over. That continues. So, in other words, distance still matters. Where you're located in the world can have an effect on your capability. Price differences do persist in different parts of the world. And finally, I want to conclude with a thought that even if we're able to have uniformly low prices all across the world, even so, the measure of what it means to be connected, of what it means to have capability, continues to evolve. I'd like to leave you with this slide. This slide is showing 3 different services and their international service revenues of those services from the United States compared to each other. The blue line is showing telegraph services, how much international revenues depended on telegraph over time, beginning in 1950, ending in the year 2000. The red is showing voice, green telex. Telex is kind of interesting because it looked like a promising technology, and that was taken over likely because of the advent of consumer-grade fax machines. And voice has increased. But if you think about telegraph, in 1911, the British Committee on Imperial Defense had a study of the All Red Line, the series of telegraphs that connected the United Kingdom with the rest of the British Empire. It talked about how many networks there were and how many telegraphs connected the empire, and made the claim that there were so many redundancies built into the system that it would take 49 cuts to isolate the United Kingdom. They were justifiably proud of the telecommunications system they had built. Just like today, if you do a security review of fiber optic connections connecting to Eastern Europe or to Western Europe, Asia, and North America, we can also be proud of what there is, what we've accomplished. But as Darth Vader told that one guy he was about to choke in the Death Star, don't be too proud of the technological terror you've constructed, because what is sufficient today is no longer sufficient tomorrow. Certainly no one is using telegraphs today. So 20 years from now, we may look back on fondness of what we were proud of in the year 2013, just like we look back on fondness from those Bear Bryant advertisements from the 1970s, or how people in 1964 did on what happened in 1927. 20 years from now, who knows, you may have a famous sporting coach come on your whatever video screen you're using and challenge you by saying, have you engaged in a 3D hologram with your mama? I sure wish I could hologram with mine. Thank you, and roll Tide.
Great. Thank you.